Hi, this is Walcott Fine Art, and I'm Jason Walcott. In today's video, we're going to take one more look at a group of oil paint colors that's the oldest and most traditional on an artist's palette, and that is earth colors. So, let's go have a look. Hello everyone. So today we are going to be taking a look at some earth colors that are available in oil paint. Now, earth colors are some of the oldest pigments that there are. They've been around for tens of thousands of years. So if you've ever seen like the old cave paintings from Lascaux and places like that, those would have all been earth colors because they occur naturally. They come from clays that are found in the ground. And they're very, very, very permanent. They've been around for billions of years without changing color because they're all basically iron oxides. So because they're iron based, they're very plentiful on the earth, easy to find. Modern day earth colors are mostly synthetic. They don't really mine them from the earth directly anymore. Most of them are synthetic nowadays, but they're still very inexpensive to make, so they're some of the most inexpensive pigments typically that you'll find in oil paint lines. So let's get started and take a look at a few of the most common ones. So probably the most common one you'll see that I use on my palette is yellow ochre. And yellow ochre goes by one of two pigment numbers. It's either pigment yellow 42 or 43, depending on whether it's synthetic or natural. I particularly like the Rembrandt yellow ochre. And it's a sort of lightish, bright, dull yellow. And it's just a really great color for landscapes and painting, subdued color schemes, landscapes especially. And if you mix it with white, a little bit of white, yellow ochre makes a really nice sort of pale sandy color that's great for beaches. It's just got a lot of applications. And it's kind of an opaque color. So it maybe not, you wouldn't want to use it so much for glazing, although you could if you thinned it out a lot. So yellow ochre is one of the most common ones that you'll find on people's palettes. It's very versatile. It's great for landscapes. I like the Rembrandt one, which is the pigment yellow. I believe it's 43. Yeah. No, 42. I'm sorry. It's 42 is the synthetic version. So it's pigment yellow 42. And another common one that you'll see a lot is burnt sienna. Now, burnt sienna is technically a dark, dull orange. It's in the orange family range. Or it's what you might call a brown, as most of the earth pigments are in the brown, yellowish brown to brownish red range. There's a few that aren't, but they're not as common, so I won't be going over those today. Now, burnt sienna is a very common color that you'll see a lot on a lot of artists' palettes. It is pretty transparent, so you can see when you spread it out thin, it's got this beautiful fiery orange undertone that makes it wonderful for glazing. Burnt sienna has been around for centuries. When you mix it with white, it makes a nice, warm, orangey, brown tan color that's great for painting flesh tones. And, you'll start to recognize as you see these colors, a lot of the old masters, during the Renaissance and even before that, mostly what they used in their paintings was earth tones or earth colors because they were inexpensive, they were easy to get, and so they would reserve their expensive like reds and blues and the bright colors like that, like ultramarine and vermilion, for very small spots in the painting, if they used them at all. But they were really good at taking these earth colors and making whole paintings out of them. So if you look like at a lot of Rembrandt paintings and stuff, you'll see mostly earth colors, and they just did wondrous things with them. Now, burnt sienna comes from raw sienna. So I'll explain the difference to you when you see those different names, why you see raw sienna and raw umber, and then you'll see burnt sienna and burnt umber. And so the difference basically comes from the raw colors are raw as they come out of the ground. So you'll see that raw sienna, which is a little bit less commonly used than burnt sienna, this is raw sienna. Now raw sienna is similar in color to yellow ochre, but it's darker. It's a little bit darker and a little bit duller than yellow ochre. But it has that kind of cool greenish tone to it, as well as being dull. Now what they do is they take the raw sienna, which originally came from Siena, Italy, which is why it's called that. They take this raw clay out of the ground, or nowadays they make it synthetically, and they do what's called calcining it, which means they basically roast it at a high temperature, but they make sure they do it so it's not in the presence of oxygen. That way it can't burn. So you're roasting it at a high temperature, but making sure it doesn't burn, and it becomes burnt sienna. So when you do that, it changes the chemical structure a little bit, and it becomes this beautiful transparent red color that we call burnt sienna. And so basically burnt umber and raw umber are the same thing. Raw umber is the stuff that comes out of the ground raw, and then they calcine it in the furnace and it turns into burnt umber, which typically makes the color warmer and more transparent in most cases. So this is raw sienna, and again, mix that with a little white so you can see what it looks like. Very similar to yellow ochre. You probably wouldn't need both on your palette. You could choose one or the other. But it just makes that same nice sort of yellowy sandy color when you mix it with white. It's a little bit less yellow than the yellow ochre. So, okay, now for raw umber, there's two types of raw umber. There's raw umber that's warm and raw umber that's cool. And I do use raw umber on my palette, but I use the cool raw umber. And there's a big difference between the two when you mix them with white. And I will say that most of the earth colors, they will all have, not all of them, but there's only a couple of pigment names, pigment index numbers that they go by. And the reason for that is they're basically all the same chemical. They're the iron oxides that come from the earth. So burnt sienna and transparent red oxide and red ochre and Venetian red and all these different names, those are all pigment red 101, and they're actually slightly different colors, but they're all the same pigment red 101. And the other one you'll see is pigment brown 7, which usually refers to like raw umber and some of the other more common browns, like burnt umber I think is a pigment brown 7, and they're just all basically two different kinds of iron oxides. So I'll show you the difference between, now this is the warm raw umber, and if you mix that with a little white, you can see it's still pretty dull compared to this over here, but it does have that little bit of a warmth to it that you'll see when I compare it to the cool raw umber, which is this. So you see the cool raw umber is much more grayish and very much more neutral. And now when you compare it to this, you can see how this raw umber up here is warmer. And typically the warm raw umber is easier to find, but I personally don't feel it's as useful because it's very close in color to burnt umber, and burnt umber is more common. So the paint manufacturers that make the cool version are the Richardson Oils, makes the cool raw umber, and Vasari is the other brand that makes the raw umber that's cool like this. And sometimes you'll see like Tassel Earth in the Rublev line is this same basic pigment that's the cool raw umber, so you could use that as well. So burnt umber, which is the next one, which is the roasted version of the raw umbers, is, you can see, just like the burnt sienna, once you do that roasting thing or calcining it, it becomes very warm and much more transparent. And when you mix it with white, it's a very warm brown compared to the raw version. And burnt umber is another very common one that you'll see used in a lot of landscape paintings, but for any palette. But it's great for landscapes, for making greens, mixing with blue and yellow to make landscape greens. So it comes in handy painting like brass and gold and colors like that. So probably yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and burnt umber are going to be your most common earth colors that you're going to see that you may want to have on your palette. And the others are either, you know, some artists prefer them, and so I'm going to show you what I prefer in place of those two. Is I use transparent oxide red and transparent oxide brown. Now the transparent oxide red is very similar to burnt sienna, but it's just a little bit more transparent, and because of that transparency, it makes really great darks. So the transparent oxide red and the burnt sienna are more or less could be used interchangeably. So if you mix that with a little white, you can just see it's a little bit more of an intense color than the burnt sienna. But it just offers a little bit more transparency, which makes it a little bit more versatile in mixes, I find personally. And then the transparent oxide brown is more of a brownish tone. Winsor Newton makes this color, Michael Harding. You can find it if you search around for it, although it's not quite as common. If you mix that with a little white, we'll see that's a nice chocolatey brown color that's just a little bit warmer than the burnt umber. So, but you could substitute either one for the other color pretty easily. So, and then last but not least is a group of earth colors that is more of a red color. Now this is Terra Rosa's by Winsor Newton, but it often goes by other names. You'll see it. It's sometimes called red ochre. It's sometimes called Indian red. It's sometimes called Venetian red, just depending on the manufacturer. Now this is a much lighter red. It's more of like the color of rust. Because like I said, these are all iron oxides, which is exactly what rust is. It's also what makes your blood red. And this color comes out of the tube lighter and already very red, as you can see that. And when you mix it with white, it's a very opaque color on its own, but when you mix it with white, it makes these very nice, almost salmon pinks that are really good for flesh tones. So, and then again, that's Pigment Red 101. So, and I know it's not showing up on camera, unfortunately, as much as it is in person, but this is much pinkier and redder than any of these other colors I've showed you over here. So that's Venetian Red, Terra Rosa, red ochre, any of those color names refer to that same color. So, and these are all either pigment red 101 or pigment brown 7. So that's a basic little tour of the earth tones that you might want to try out and use on your palette. And so I hope that you found this video helpful, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. Thanks so much for watching. Go ahead and click on that subscribe button so you won't miss the next video. And why not spread the joy? Be sure to share my videos on your favorite social media. Don't forget to head on over to my website, walcottfineart.com, where you can see my art, read my blog, or when you join my newsletter list, you can win free art. Every month, I'll choose a lucky winner for my email list, and that person will receive a mini original oil painting. There's a chance to win every month, so be sure to sign up today so you don't miss out. Plus, you'll get my fun newsletter. See you next time!